Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. Content warning. While the Cult of Christianity often deals with tough subjects regarding religious trauma and other triggering topics, some episodes may be more explicit than others. This episode contains content that may be distressing to some listeners. This may include multiple mentions of self-harm, suicide, sexual abuse, or other intense concepts. Please only listen if you are in the headspace to do so. Take care of yourself. On today's show, we have the wondrous, the beyond words, an angel to some, a demon to most. I don't know. I didn't write down an introduction. Lily's back. Hi.
I love that. I wasn't sure where that was gonna go because you were saying like wondrous and then beyond words, but then you kept talking, so clearly you had words, and I wanted to know what they were gonna be.
It was also funny too because I had no idea where it was going either. So I just I was like, I'll do a funny introduction, and then I just started talking. And I'll say somewhat funny, but mostly accurate. How have you been? What's new with you?
I've been a lot of things. I'm currently quite good, and everything is new with me.
Give me a list of the highlights, the plot points. What's been going on?
Okay, so I think it's been, I went back to see when the last episode was that I was on, and that looked like it was the finale with our good old friend Chris. And so that was probably like a year ago ish. I mean, I think it came out like a little more than a year ago, but we probably recorded it about a year ago.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And then, so I was looking at like the date of like when that pod came out, because, time is a man-made infrastructure that I technically have to abide by, but I still don't really follow it. And I was like, when was that? And it was about 2 weeks after I had already, I think, applied to grad school. But about 2 weeks after my partner of 5 years and I decided to part ways. And then that led me to getting a new apartment within the next month. And I had also started a new job the same weekend that we decided to part ways. So anybody that, has gone through the process of getting a new place knows that just, he and I had been living with his folks after our house had sold unexpectedly. I didn't think that we'd be there for more than 3 to 6 months. Cut to me getting laid off, cut to me deciding to go back to school, and then continuously not being able to afford moving out, and him not wanting to move out, and us being there for about 2 years. And then me getting a new job that would put me in the prospect of being able to move out, but the same weekend that, I wanted to seriously look into that. Anyway, all that to say, rough time getting into a new place, but I did manage to get into a new place after renting a room from a classmate for about a month. And now I'm in Queen Anne, Seattle. I don't know if you watch Grey's Anatomy. This is so random, but if there's any Grey's Anatomy fans that are listening, I happen to be exactly 2 blocks up from the house that they used in the first few seasons of Grey's Anatomy, is like Meredith Grey's mom's house.
Can I just interject and say that when we met in Seattle that one time, you and I hung out in person, this was like the only thing you cared about showing me was this house. So I think it's pretty funny that you live like close to it now.
Well, and we have pictures of you and I and Amelia all hanging out at Cary Park, which is now 3 blocks away from where I live.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah. So that's just kind of, and that was, again, I was like looking for, any kind of like somewhat decent roommate apartment situation. So I wasn't even looking to be right here. And so that was just like a really random kind of happenstance. But something that I was thinking about a few days ago was just on the topic of like randomly living somewhere that is meaningful. I was thinking about how the first time that I had been in a place that I knew I wanted to choose to live in, it happened to be Queen Anne. And I was, I think, 17, and my mom and stepdad and I were visiting his adult daughter who was living with some roommates in Queen Anne. And I didn't really know how to conceptualize what I was feeling without making my mom feel like, inadequate, or like I absolutely hated where I lived, which was kind of true, but, I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. So I just remember just kind of asking, where is this? What is this neighborhood called? And being told it was Queen Anne. And I just remember walking around and seeing just the shops and the way that people were just kind to each other, even though they didn't know each other. And just the aspects of community and city coming together in one was just, it really stuck with me. So that was just kind of cool to notice that it kind of seems like a little bit of a full circle moment. Anytime I get a chance to walk around my neighborhood, that really kind of strikes me.
Gotcha. And well, that can be good for mental health, just because as you're talking, I'm just thinking of like how, when I was going through my divorce and stuff, like I knew I needed to come to Atlanta because I loved Atlanta, and I was living in a place I didn't hate, or I didn't love. I did kind of hate. And
was that Eastern Washington? I can't remember.
Yes, yeah, back in Spokane. And so like I think for me there is definitely something to chapter flipping, like when you go through something like a breakup or even a job change or whatever it is. When you go through changes, sometimes it helps to have other changes go along with it. It sounds like that was true for you too.
For sure. Yeah, it's been a time of just crap ton of changes. I moved, and that was last summer. So I signed the lease on the place I'm in now in August, and then I just, being authentic to being human, I got into this just old pattern with an ex that I've actually mentioned on here, that he and I went through some religious trauma together years ago, around the age of like 19, 20. Had a very tumultuous fling with him post breakup over the summer and early fall. And that took a big toll on my mental health and my just time in general. I learned a lot about myself though, in the process. Started grad school in October with 2 unfinished papers from the quarter previous. And my plan was to just do those papers in addition to everything else. And that didn't go as planned. I ended up getting laid off from my job very, very unexpectedly 2 days before Thanksgiving. And then I had to just scramble to try and get my rent paid from any charity possible. I learned a lot about how inaccessible charities are unless you are, already a certain time passed on your rent, or weird application. It was also the end of the year. And so a lot of places were out of funding. My very beloved 10-year-old cat ended up passing away from a clot in his heart December 21st. And I was drowning. I was just fucking drowning. I'm like struggling with tears right now because I haven't been that close.
Yeah.
I haven't been that close to suicide ideation in a really long time. And then I was having so much just imposter syndrome because here I am in a graduate program to be a couple of family therapist, and I have a plan on how to end my life, and I don't feel confident in reaching out to the support lines or the crisis lines that I had worked for or that I had friends that had worked for so many reasons. But the main reason was that I frankly just felt more confident in my own ability to self-manage myself. And instead of going through the layers that I knew that crisis management teams are trained to go through, and the level of alarm that it causes, I didn't want to deal with that. So I honestly felt more confident in my own ability to self-manage day by day. And that was really hard. So needless to say, well, not needless to say, I should say it. I couldn't swing twice the amount of work that I had intended on swinging in grad school. Especially in addition to just life that just did not stop.
Right.
And so I got behind on my work, and it was caught that I had 2 unfinished papers from the quarter before. And my school has this really great program where you can, before you finish your bachelor's degree, you can use the first 12 credits of your master's to finish the last 12 credits of your bachelor's. And it saves you time and money because you are paying the bachelor's price for those 12 credits of your master's. And anybody that can tries to utilize that, and I was trying to utilize that, but because of essentially not keeping up my end of the bargain and finishing the final bachelor's papers that I had, I met with the dean of the program, and I was excused from the program and encouraged to reapply, but only after I have physically received my bachelor's, because they didn't want to see the same thing repeat itself in the future. So, I had to just kind of sit with that. And if I hadn't gone through the loss of my cat and my job, it probably would have sunk me about as far as that had. But at that point, it was kind of like, I probably need this as much as it hurts. I probably need this time to honestly grow and get into a better place, to just absorb the things I needed to be absorbing that I was not able to at the time. Because ultimately, this is maybe corny, but it's about the end result. It's about the kind of practitioner that I need to be. And in order for me to be that kind of practitioner, I need to start putting my clients first now with my education. And so that's what I need to be doing, and that's what I am doing. Unfortunately, I lost access to financial aid because I was already on academic probation with the overdue paper. So I lost access to financial aid and needed to successfully complete an academic quarter, which needed to be out of pocket. So for winter quarter, Also, I was able to, before I started winter quarter, back to the whole job thing, I was able to, in between getting other temporary jobs, I got a meeting with the store manager, and I was able to advocate for myself over and over and over again. The final advocation was that meeting with the store manager. But I was able to prove wrongful and termination, and I got my job back.
Oh, I might have even missed this update. That's awesome.
It was amazing. That didn't happen until January. But because I was obviously so depressed, I just couldn't fight for myself for at least like 2 weeks after I had gotten laid off. But I had been talking to HR and been talking to my district manager, and the thing that had got me laid off was I had responded to some really surprising and abusive behavior from my manager at the time by saying this person was just a bitch to me and I don't know why. I was terminated for using that language on the floor. And so I was able to meet with the store manager and provide some context and say, I absolutely would never literally call someone that. I was saying their behavior was this way. I wish that I had used 500 other words to describe the way that I was feeling or what had happened, but I didn't. And it felt normal to me because of the language used at that bar. And I'm so sorry. And I wish that this had been a write-up because I had no write-ups. It went just to termination. So I was able to advocate for myself and I got my job back, but I couldn't work for that manager again. I had to be placed at a different store. And unfortunately, the store that was close to me didn't have enough room for a new staff person. So I was placed in another location that is pretty far from me. But I was so thrilled to get my job back. I remember just like dancing in my apartment by myself. I got the call from my district manager and he had been such a jerk to me before I had the meeting with my store manager. And I just got the call that I could come back, and it still took about like a month and a half to get scheduled, which was really frustrating. But I just remember just feeling so vindicated and feeling like it was such a huge win. And just, I had to have help from my mom and have this weird feelings to go through with my mom because it seemed like such an interesting way for me to learn about her and the ways that she had not been able to be there for me before, and the ways that she had not had anyone be there for her growing up, and the ways that it was able to provide her some healing in helping me, and the way that seeing that happen for her gave me some healing. It was really, really profound. And in my first quarter of grad school, we had been discussing family of origin and traumas with family of origin and within your family. And I was not able to have those open and honest conversations with her that I needed to be having in the space that we were in. And I think that there is more room for that now going forward. So I think that will be really, really good, both for my education and for the two of us as well. Our relationship has, I don't want to say changed, but it has progressed. And that has been really interesting. Yeah, anyway, I feel like I've been going on just like a monologue, but just so many things have changed. I was starting to say that I went through a single credit quarter at school, which I did. I did a single credit independent study in cultural masking, and then submitted a video to my advisor on that. And then I just now started spring quarter last week. I have my class here actually in a few hours online on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sorry, I'm like all snuffling. Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I think after this quarter, I'll have about 7 credits to go before I can reapply again. So if everything is timed the way that I think that it can be timed, and it's really complicated because of the whole like application window for grad school and how wide it is, but how specific it is. I think if everything is timed right, I will probably be able to apply for the spring cohort this next year. So that's the way things are going with that. And I'm working again at my old job, but different location, new apartment, still have a cat. It's his younger sister. So I'm still glad that I have a little friend with me still. I was worried that she would adjust to being a single cat in a difficult way, but I'm not really sure that she's noticed. Her brain is so small. So yeah, that's where I'm at. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster, as this tearful monologue will indicate. I know that I can trust you to put trigger warnings aplenty.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And can I just say, you are so brave to be so vulnerable, like publicly. Like, I do like share a good bit myself on the show, but there are things that I'm like, I don't know if I want to be that vulnerable. And you are just consistently an inspiration to me to continue to be vulnerable, even when it's like tough parts to share, even when like I think you and I are both like, I don't know, woke enough or therapized enough to like not judge ourselves too harshly and try to be kind to ourselves and say, look, like not all of this is my fault, and I do take responsibility for the things that I contributed to. We know how to say the right things, but it's still scary. It's still scary to like put yourself out there, and you seem to have such little fear of that, and it just makes me admire you more.
Well, I appreciate that. I do want to specify that it's not because I'm not afraid of it necessarily. It's mostly because I have grown so much from being able to witness other people's vulnerability and be able to accept myself with so much more kindness and compassion, because I've been able to witness other people's full scope of their humanity. Something that was really powerful that my mom said to me when I was really little was that you can't compare your insides to other people's outsides. And that's a really simple thing to tell a little child, but that's just something that I found to be so important to remember. And just, I have gotten really important feedback, from people that I've shared with my vulnerability with on how it has impacted them to love themselves and to just be open about loving themselves, and just the complicatedness of being human. And it's not glorious, and it's not fabulous or Instagram worthy. It's just, sometimes it's fucking dog shit. And, and it's important to acknowledge the dog shitness, because if you don't, then you can't grow. You can't move forward. You can just sit there and say, wow, this is all it will ever be. And it's okay to feel that way. But as long as you remember that just every single day is going to bring you closer to something different, that's all that really matters. It's just more and more differentness. And eventually it's going to be enough differentness to where it feels better. And then you can make it feel intentionally different and intentionally better.
Yeah. I've been doing pretty good.
Sorry, I didn't ask. No. It's your podcast, John. How have you been doing?
Man, I would only feel comfortable making that kind of joke to you. But yeah, like in all seriousness, I actually have been doing good, which is why I don't have much to share. Not that we shouldn't celebrate the good things either, but like, just, like I feel like, I feel like in previous years, I've had kind of the shit storms, where it's just like thing after thing after thing.
Mm-hmm.
And probably in the last year, it's been a lot more manageable. I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, it's just like, obviously things still come up and stressors still happen, but like nothing so traumatic that a radical life change has happened, like moving or anything like that. And the hardships are usually a little bit more like either self-induced or kind of like just a trigger that I process through, rather than like actual like setbacks, if that makes sense, where it's been like, now I have to change my trajectory. It's just been a nice time of like being able to kind of stay on script for a while, which, the only thing that really does produce as far as bad mental health is a little bit of anxiety about like, when is shit gonna hit the fan and when are things gonna be bad again, because that's just kind of how my brain works.
Do you feel like you're not able to enjoy? Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like actually I'm better about that than I used to be. I can enjoy the moment typically. I'll just usually have like a bad weekend maybe, or like a couple of days just randomly where my brain will be a little scrambled. But it's nice that that's a couple days and not a couple months.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I did want to kind of ask, like, obviously you've been through a lot in the past year, and obviously you've been through a lot in your life. But like, how would you kind of, stepping outside of yourself a little bit, like, how would you evaluate your mental health? Like, is it kind of like, I feel sick, I feel healthy, I feel in between, I feel like I'm good, but my life isn't, how would you kind of parse that all out?
I was actually thinking about this at work last night because I have gotten to a steady place. I noticed that in the last at least couple of months, my life has been back to a very buoyed kind of place where it's just kind of like, all right, things are as they need to be. And I'm kind of evaluating, like, I don't think I'm bored, right? I'm not bored. I think I'm just good. I think I'm just noticing that I'm good.
That's such a relatable feeling. That's why I'm laughing. It's just like, am I bored or am I just okay?
Yeah.
What is this?
Because there's still things that are frustrating that shake things up, after I got my job back, I got into a car accident where, I'm fine, the other person's fine, but my car was totaled. And so I have been taking public transit for the first time ever. And that's been frustrating because of my store being, far away. It takes me like an hour and a half to get home and to get there. And then, missing a bus by being a minute early could make me 15 minutes late. So it's like, this is awful. But it's like, with the perspective I think that the last year has given me, and it's not just about that, but it's not back to the like, wow, this is dire. It's just like, this is like really frustrating. Anyway, so that's literally boring. That's kind of what I mean. It's just like, I'm good, I guess, I've been seeing someone for the last 6 months, and it's not serious, and it's also not tumultuous. It's just it's good, I get to see my friends when their schedule and my schedule permits. I finally have a steady school and work schedule, so I can plan things at least a little bit, as long as I wake up in time for time differences, like scheduling this podcast.
I wasn't going to say a word.
Hey, I'm open about being vulnerable.
Yeah. No, this is attempt number 2 at recording. But to be fair, that was purely a time difference mishap with a schedule that had nothing to do with anything else. And you were still down to do it. I just was busy.
It's also a little bit me. I mean, I had I had for some reason scheduled to do a podcast interview with you at 8 a.m. and then not that long afterwards, I scheduled myself to bus to a 9 a.m. teeth cleaning, which obviously didn't happen. I was there at 11, which was, I was able to reschedule that day, which was great.
Fun fact about both you and I, we should not be doing anything before 9 a.m. Just we do that as people.
I'm going to say I don't need to be doing anything before 11.
just listen, we both take I don't know, some of my classes go till 10 p.m. okay, so it's not like I can do a class and then just go to sleep. I have to go watch some garbage TV and relax and stuff.
I've had classes go until 9:30.
Exactly. So it's we're doing things, we just operate on a slightly different schedule than other people. But I hear you that there's this weird sense of even when you're good, there's always an asterisk or a question mark because you're just one, you and I probably overthink a tad.
A little bit.
But
I'd say a little bit.
I do you think it's connected to our religious upbringing in any way? One connection I could see is just when you're told you're in a spiritual battle daily, you are kind of expecting a lot of mental turmoil every day. Do you think that in any way relates to some of those feelings?
I actually think there's a lot of different ways that overthinking or overanalyzing really connects to religious trauma. The biggest thing that really connects to me from that is the hardest part for me in ever leaving Christianity that I struggled with for years before I actually left Christianity was, how do I phrase this? I didn't want to turn away from something if it was the truth just because I didn't like it or just because it didn't work for me.
Yeah, almost discouraged from self-interest, right? It's if you might enjoy this, beware. Is that what you're talking about?
Not exactly. It's more like, okay, so I don't like the idea of Christianity, sure, but I don't want to leave something just because I don't like it if it is actually true. I don't want to find out that this actually is the truth. This is the way that my life ends, or this is eternal life. I don't want to find out the hard way that Christianity was right all along. And I just left because I thought it was wrong. And I had to get to a place where even if I do ultimately find out that Christianity was right, I am still okay with that because I do not want to be serving that entity, even if it is factually true. But that kind of overthinking of well, what if it is true? What if all of these things is the truth and this is the hard truth and I just don't like it? And that was keeping me there. And I had to get to a place of, well, what if it is? I am still scared of hell if I get really, really honest. But it's not, that fear isn't worth it to me to be serving an entity that I do not trust and do not support the ideals of and do not want.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it makes me upset just because, I don't know if I don't think I consciously carry any kind of fear of hell or fear of the Christian God existing. I do definitely feel like it's more subconscious. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely valid. I would also say that it is frustrating because it's how dare you put someone in the predicament of having to bet an eternity of suffering on their ideal, normal people who weren't raised how we were, don't have to necessarily evaluate whether they would risk a lifetime in hell over their beliefs, or even worse, over their just desires. Like, they're just normal human desires. So like, you know, for me, like that brings up feelings of almost like anger and frustration, and like, you know, like a lot of that is sort of feeding into some of my motivations and like wanting to investigate groups that use coercive control, because that's what I hear in that, right, is like this tactic of, well, if you leave, you'll have to face this no matter what. It's like, well, I don't even want to face the question. I think the question is ridiculous, you know, but I don't really get a choice in it because of how I was raised. What's your reaction to my feelings there?
Can you clarify what it is the question that you're speaking to is?
Well, like you're saying, like you've answered the question, even if all this is true, I'm still going to live how I want. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's just so unfair that you even have to think through that. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, because like if we were never taught about hell, we wouldn't think through it that hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really fascinating and really inspiring to see my friends have kiddos and to see the different ways that I watch them be parented. One of my classes that I'm taking this quarter is childhood development, and I've taken some child classes before, and I'm super excited to be taking some of the child therapy and play therapy classes in my future, because as much as I don't want to have any of my own, kiddos fascinate and excite me. And it's really interesting to see people develop just without any influence as to their eternal life. And I feel like that sounds condescending, but it's just really interesting to see kids just get curious about everything and not have it shut down in some of the ways that I started to expect it to be shut down. It really makes me wonder who I would have been. And I certainly know that I would have been a lot of the same person that I am now, but so much of the person that I am now, I had to get through by going through so many like hoops that had crisscrossing ropes in the hoop to try to get through.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that really answered your question.
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is just the like part of my, you know, part of because when I think of my religious trauma, in a lot of ways, I kind of perceive it as a thing I've got to hold on to some extent, which is always a little dangerous to think that about your trauma of any kind.
As an identity?
But, you know, like, well, no, less so that, and more so like I'm not afraid of my religious trauma, I guess would be the quick sentence way to put it. Mm-hmm. But I am angry that it exists. You know, like I still very much am not like okay. Like I'm not okay with it. Like I think it's unfair, you know, because even though like, yeah, if I get triggered by, you know, we're recording this shortly after the eclipse that happened this year. Right. And I didn't get any like, oh, the rapture's happening feelings personally. But, you know, I know a lot of people did. And it just makes me angry. Like, I'm just upset that that's a thing. Like, I'm like, what a waste of energy. And like, it's like, I just know this about myself, that like part of my dealing with religious trauma is honestly just dealing with the anger that comes from the fact that it exists, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's really worth spending time with. Yeah, it's interesting for me to go to that place, because I feel like sometimes when I talk about religious trauma or religion in general now, I feel like sometimes maybe I give the air of this kind of like, I have grown so much that I have removed myself from it. And that's not That's not how I identify, and that's not how I want to come across. I just feel like I've gotten some different perspective on it in different aspects and in different contexts. But the rage still does exist for me, that I had these complications and these blocks in my development that I should not have had and should not have had to deal with. In class last week, we started discussing, along with child development, child-on-child sexual violence. And that's something we're going to be discussing a bit more. And it's a really common experience for children in different ways to experience sexual violence, whether that be through exploration or through sincere violence. And so I shared an experience that I had that made me feel like I had to remove my purity ring that I had put on at the age of 10. And it's like, what is that?
Yeah, it's like, what the fuck is what it's like.
Yeah,
it is, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and I don't, in that particular instance, my violence wasn't because of religion, although it often is for a lot of people.
Right.
The way that I internalized it and internalized my understanding of what had happened and my embarrassment and shame about it was that I was not sexually pure anymore. And that's just like, it's just so many layers of not right.
Yes. And it's those layers of not right that just like, I mean, in some ways, if I want to be like kind of, I hate these people who talk like this, but I'll borrow their language for a minute. But like, like in some ways, like, I mean, it is the fuel for the good work I do now, like in some ways, right? Like that rage and that like desire for there to be justice for not only like kiddos who do like suffer just unbelievably in groups like this, but then like also just like the ignorance that is in communities that don't even it's like the willful ignorance and then also the legitimate ignorance, right, of like the system that is being set up is harming people and like in life altering ways to the point where you and I approaching our 30s are still wrestling with some of the stuff. And I feel like it just needs to be different. I mean, the things just need to be a lot different than they've been in the past, and I think they are becoming different. I have some optimism. But I'll ask you this question because I think it relates to this. Like, how do you perceive like your self-worth and identity? And like how does that connect to some of those old thought patterns of like, I think we were both pretty much taught that we were unworthy just by default, like, do you find yourself past that, or do those feelings still come up?
Yeah. That's a really important thing to talk about. And I'm really, really glad that you do continue to talk about it. I absolutely was taught that I was inherently unworthy. Without Christ, just inherently soiled beyond repair, and that I was supposed to glorify in how broken and unworthy I was because it signified the opportunity to be made whole again or be made acceptable again. And that to me it makes me so just deeply sad. I mean, duh, but it just signifies such a clear message of you have to see yourself as small and dirty and unlovable and broken and cast away in order for you to not be those things. And it's such a horrible emotional gaslight way to teach someone to look at themselves. And I know that didn't directly answer your question of like, do I, but, it's just something that I'm so like, just like, if you sit with it, it's like truly like, seriously, wow.
Well, and of course, I'll cut you off your answer to insert my own, but like it's like and what else is new? But the the thing for me is like to me, I just hear the like manipulation at play there. Like the only reason you would ever want your fellow humanity to like feel like that kind of piece of shit is to manipulate them. Like, because it serves no other purpose in any other way to like indoctrinate that kind of mindset. That's my opinion. Sorry, you can continue.
Well, no, it's true, because it's like I remember just kind of like the first waves of realizing that if I didn't view myself in those ways, if I didn't view myself as like just beyond hope and beyond help, then that disregarded any need for a savior. So if I didn't need a savior, what did that mean? Or what does that mean? And I know that is like the biggest question you're never supposed to ask, is like, do I need a savior? But it's like, what am I being saved from? Aside from obviously just the somatic fear of eternal hell and eternal torture. That is very clear. But without that threat, if I go inside myself, if I go inside of what I am told to believe about myself and to believe about other people, if I take those things away, what does that leave me with? What need does that leave me with?
Yeah. Does it still come up? You know, like, because for me, I don't think it does consciously ever, but I do wonder, you know, on some of my bad days, if like it's in the background, if that makes sense.
No, for sure. Yeah. And I was trying to like, just like get off my little like outraged soapbox and like actually answer the dang question. I don't think that it does, to be perfectly honest with you, because it makes me so deeply upset. And it, frankly, it never sat well with me when it was being taught to me. It never made complete sense, because I just didn't see myself that way. I hadn't done anything to make myself distrust myself. So if I didn't have a reason to distrust myself, it didn't make sense. I knew that it was how I was supposed to think. So it was very much something that I would lean into with my beliefs, and that I would, accept as fact with my Christianity. But if I were to parse it out, if I were to parse out the different things that I was expected to believe, which I eventually did do, because that's just who I am as a person. I think a lot of people do if they allow themselves the bravery. That part didn't make sense to me. So, no, I don't think, as far as I am conscious of, I don't think that it comes up for me.
Well, God, do I envy that. I mean, like, I don't think it does for me either. I just get, the subconscious is much harder to investigate. And I would only feel comfortable asking like someone like you, who I'm pretty close to, something like this. But, earlier you were mentioning like thoughts of suicide ideation coming back. And that's something you and I have both dealt with over the years. So for you, is it not tied to like a sense of unworthiness? Is it more tied to like not just literally wanting to opt out and not live anymore? Or is it I guess I'm asking, is it tied to self-hate? Because for me in the past, oftentimes it has been tied to like self-hate, but I know that's not the case for everyone who has wrestled with suicide ideation.
No, I really appreciate the question, because I think it's really, really important to normalize talking about suicide ideation and where that comes from for different people. And that comes with the vulnerability. It's important to talk about this.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, we need to normalize it so that people aren't afraid to talk about it. Same with death, same with everything. Anyway, so I have too many soapboxes. I need to put them all away for a minute.
Never.
So for me, no, it's not tied to self-worth or self-hatred. For me, it really comes from a desire to escape and a feeling like I cannot get out of what I'm drowning in.
So a little more hopelessness kind of feeling.
Yeah, like it will just, like, I know it's weird because it's not necessarily as simple as things won't get better, because I mean, at the root of it, yeah, it kind of is, but it's also not as simple as that, because,
right.
You know, I know through time and experience, you know, yeah, if you give things enough time, literal time, and if you give yourself enough time to give yourself a chance for things to get better, then there's always a space for things to get better. At the same time, it also just comes from being in a place where I don't have options. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it's,
or at least it feels that's the overwhelming feeling, right? There's a lack of options.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the not knowing of the options that exist, and being in that cyclical state of, I can't get out of this.
Yeah, that spiral. I think that spiral is pretty, I don't know if it's universal, but yeah, where it's like you get stuck in a loop, right? Yeah, and for me, like, that loop is usually I suck is like a theme in there. So like I attribute a lot of blame to myself in it, which makes it way, like, it's so difficult to get out when I'm blaming myself for the circumstances, for the lack of options. Like, oh, well, obviously this is my fault somehow. And these are things I'm much more comfortable talking about now, partially because, you know, this is not a common occurrence for me anymore. Like I, you know, once a year is kind of like where it's starting to seem like I have a day where I feel like this, and then I manage to like cope for that day, and then I'm fine the next, and over the month after we'll, you know, kind of rehabilitate back to a healthier mindset. But it's scary, you know, because like you do feel so out of control, like it's almost like it's happening to you, or at least that's how it's felt for me.
Yeah. Yeah. When you experience out of controlness, do you feel like you, I don't know how to ask this question intellectually, but like when you experience that feeling of, it happening to you and not having control, I guess, how do you kind of remind yourself that you do have that control?
I don't know that I try to be honest. I think once I'm in that state, I literally will like just like, I mean, whatever small instinct there is in me to self-preserve, you know, I'll start like literally doing coping methods, whether it's grab my guitar, whether it's writing, whether it's bang on some drums, whether it's go outside. You know, just the things that I've learned, the skills I've learned both through therapy and just experience. That like just kind of like distract me from it, because the next morning I'll wake up and feel different. But in the moment, I don't think there's anything that brings me back. And that's part of what the scariness is, right? Like of like, you know, and I have called a suicide hotline once or twice. And One time it was super helpful, one time less so. And you know, I am glad we're talking about this, but for me, like again, the ties to religious trauma are so like so like they're one and the same, to be frank. Like, but that's because I mean, the reason I self-harmed in high school was because my church was telling me I was a piece of shit. I mean, like, that's like, you know, like I can try to, and I'm willing to say that it was a little more complicated than that, but not much more complicated than that, you know, is going to church and hearing that you're unworthy and that, like, you know, going in high school, you're going through puberty. And so you're feeling horny like all the time. And so you're feeling sinful all the time, at least in my environment. And so, like, you know, those kind of things, like, it's really, you know, I first started thinking about suicide in high school. So now, like, a lot of it, I think, is just the neuropath, right? Is like, oh, you're feeling suicidal. What did you do? You know, is just kind of like the accompanying voice. And so, like, again, very thankful that this is not a daily occurrence like it was in high school, and certainly not even like a common occurrence like it was when I was going through my divorce, you know. Now it's so as far as getting out of it, I mean, it's really just finding a way to distract myself till I'm tired enough to sleep. And sometimes that involves alcohol too. Like, sometimes I'll just be like, I just need to get drunk, so I pass out. I wouldn't say that's the healthiest way, but that has been a band-aid occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because, you know, you speak to feeling out of control and like these cycles are happening to you, and you speak to not feeling like you have that control until you get out of that loop. And I'm really grateful for you speaking to that. What I also hear is you fighting for yourself in those moments by reaching for those coping mechanisms that you describe, like reaching for your guitar, going outside, banging out some drums, talking to people, texting people. You know, that is still part of you taking control and of you fighting for yourself in those moments. And I am really proud of you for utilizing those tools in your tool belt.
Well, thanks. And I mean, and same to you, you know, I mean, you and I mean, this is the joy of getting older and having the experience of going to therapy and those kind of things. I did mean to ask, you know, I haven't been to therapy in quite a while. Are you still going regular? I mean, for me, it's a financial hurdle, so I don't know if that's also true in your life.
Yeah. You know, that's actually something that's been on my mind, you know, with getting my insurance back, with getting my job back. You know, I mentioned I was able to go get my teeth cleaned. I'm going back next week to get a little chip in my front tooth filled. I'm also looking for a therapist. And that is something that is really important to me, and something that I'm also going to be I don't want to say picky, but I do want to specifically see a couple and family therapist, because that's what I'm trying to be. I want to go to someone that I can learn from specifically as a therapist student. And then in addition to wanting to be like ideally a woman or femme presenting person, ideally a person that has experience with neurodivergence and queerness. But also within my insurance, and I'm not totally sure what my copay is going to be. You know, and a lot of people I'm sure that are listening are going to be like, what about your school? Yes, I definitely tried my school and tried utilizing the school therapists. And then I realized that they are very much students, and that I was showing up for a student to get experience that they really genuinely need. But that's not the space that I need to be in for myself, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah, I want to bring up two things regarding that. One is like, yeah, like all therapists are not created equal. We know that. Just like, and like some are just not for you, but some I think are just bad, you know, like are just bad at their job. Not, I don't even think it's the majority, but there are a lot of bad therapists out there.
Listen, therapy causes harm a lot of the time.
Right.
It
Exactly. Yeah.
does.
And like, and even like, there's been so much like, someone who may have gotten qualified years ago might have a very different mindset than someone within the last 20 years, and so like there's a lot of factors that go in, but the more on the flip side, I also wanted to say, do you get, for me, I think I would I don't think I'd go back to my old therapist, not because she was perfect for that time of my life, exactly what I needed. I now think I need something a little different. And I really like a mental block for me is I don't want to go through my life story again. It takes time in therapy to kind of get the plot points of your life out. And so I kind of just don't want to do all that again. So like, do you experience anything similar to that?
I totally get what you're saying. I actually had one session with someone that I liked a lot. I honestly, if she emailed me to reschedule, I didn't get it. And then I was also this would have been like right before I started grad school. So it was right before my like depression hit. And it was more just like, oh shoot, I should be in therapy, especially as I'm starting grad school. I had one session with her. I liked her a lot. She was a couple and family therapist graduate from my school that graduated a while ago. And I was kind of apprehensive about what you're describing going in, because it's like, I don't, it's similar to like getting into a new relationship, right? It's like, I don't want to like retrain a new person on how to love me and how to know me. And,
it's just so true. It's just like, you don't know I don't like those jokes, or you don't know that I like, hate that food, and like, those kind of
I don't
things.
want to, like, I don't want to train like a new sexual partner and, like reteach them about my lore.
Exactly. And like,
it's too hard.
And then it's like, and it's also, there's also like an element of editing. This is a concept we use in journalism, talking about life stories, right? We all edit, like both internally and externally. And like, I think that's like hard too, is like, well, what will I edit with this new therapist? Because ideally you're editing idealistically, I'll even say you would not edit anything to your therapist, but the fact of the matter is you're a human. So like, even if you're not, it's not that you're like lying, but like, even if what you choose to prioritize or spend time on, and what you choose to like leave out, says something about where you are. And even that experience, I think, causes some anxiety, probably not just for me, but anyone who wants to go see a new therapist, is it's like, well, how am I going to look to this person? Because my last therapist, I saw them, like in 2020. And my life was kind of like felt like it was closing in on me, and like my options were starting to limit, and not like in daily life. And I was like, oh boy, this is not good, and so I think it felt more out of necessity. So I was willing to just kind of be like, here's the worst things about me. Tell me I'm okay. And so that was good for that time. But now I'm trying to develop more who I am now. And so I think like figuring that out is a much more anxious undertaking than like just like, here's all my garbage, because I don't want to do here's all my garbage again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I think that it really, in some ways, is kind of up to the therapist and how they're approaching a new client. And then their first like intake and the first couple of sessions, because that it's really key to how a lot of the therapy is going to go after that, is how you start to get to know your client. And I'm always kind of curious how a therapist starts to get to know a person in that phase of their life, because it's you kind of can't expect a person to just kind of like meet you at whatever year they're in and just be like, okay, here's my backstory, and nor should you expect them to. And it's not gonna be helpful ultimately, I don't think, to be like, here's my entire backstory. Okay, now let's see where I'm at right now. I think it's a little bit more helpful. And this was the way, to go back to that, to mentioning that person that I had one session with, the way that she approached it was, I'm sure nothing sticking out to me as far as questions. I'm sure that she had some like basic questions for me as far as getting to know me. But she really just kind of like would ask deepening questions like as they would come up in context with something. You know, and I would just kind of like bring something up in context. I think for bigger things like religious trauma or like being a queer person, it could be really beneficial to just include that in your initial search of a therapist. It's not, I don't think, always necessary to seek a person that specializes in religious trauma, but I think that it does say a lot about a therapist if they are not informed of religious trauma. And I think that you can learn that about them within the first 1 or 2 sessions and simply decide that it's not a good fit. And ideally that therapist is going to take that as just the professional feedback that it is and move on to the next client and hopefully refer you to their job.
I'll put in my 2 cents about the whole, like, whether you want a religious trauma informed type therapist or not.
Mm-hmm.
I would say there's a lot of benefits to someone who that's not their focus and expertise. Some common language would be nice, but for me, I know it was actually helpful for this is going to sound a little bit psycho, but it's actually just how therapy works. You're like, I'm in. The thing for me is like, sometimes what you need is the validation of someone saying that's fucking crazy. In some ways, therapists who aren't as familiar with religious trauma, they will have reactions that, in my opinion, are very appropriate reactions to what you go through in church. Whereas someone who might be more religiously trauma informed might just go, oh, well, that's because this, and this. And sometimes that's helpful and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just need someone to say that's fucking insane. And you know, but that's something for you to evaluate if you're going to therapy, right? Like, what do you need right now? Do you need some validation? Do you need some new ideas? That was another big thing I think I needed in therapy when I went was I need new ideas. I just need like a different thing, like someone to think differently. So, but I do agree that like there's very specific issues that it does help to find an expert in. It's just you kind of have to evaluate what you want to get out of therapy, which is exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. I was responding so enthusiastically too, because I was just really remembering that episode that we had, you and me and Sierra talking about like religious therapy. And because I've never seen a Christian therapist, I was responding to a lot of her stories with like just shock. Like, I'm sorry, what? These are supposed to be licensed professionals? And I mean, I still think it's amazing that anyone with, I mean, I don't know, broadly speaking, anyone that is serving as a religious leader could also provide mental health therapy. Obviously not. Well, I don't know.
Or at least claim they are.
Exactly.
I mean, like any pastor can say I'm doing spiritual care and then basically traumatize you using like pseudo-therapy ideas.
Literally. And I'm actually really curious, and you know, this isn't necessarily maybe for this episode, but I'm very curious about just some of the nuances of like if religious leaders were to start charging for this care, if it were to start going through insurance, yada yada. I'm just curious.
There's whole counseling centers that take advantage of stuff like that. They're just not necessarily pastors. But there's limits for sure. And like churches really can get around a lot just by, you know, like the idea of tithing, like supporting and donating and those kind of ideas. But I did want to ask you this before we go, but feel free to like cut me off and go back if there was something you wanted to say. But do you still feel like any guilt and shame related to old religious beliefs? Because I think I'm getting past that, but that's still like a sticking point for me. It's just like, oh, I can't believe I used to not only believe that, but like teach that and like proclaim that, you know?
Yeah, I do. Mostly, No, mostly if it's kind of triggered for me in some way. Sorry, I feel like I'm getting like a little bit emotional again.
It's great content. Don't worry about it.
I wish I was getting paid for this. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I'll send you royalties of like 50 cents.
Yeah. For sure. I'll just submit my taxes to Spotify. Oh,
yeah, please do.
Yeah, no, I guess just if there's this theory that I remember hearing of, I'm not going to quote it perfectly, but just like your initial response to something that causes you shame, that is not your response anymore. That's not who you are anymore. It's the correction afterwards that is caused by that feeling of shame that is who you are now. I don't know if I communicated that perfectly.
I know what you mean. Yeah, no, like the whole, like, I've often said, like, if there's a guy who does a certain behavior and I'm like, I find myself extra angry at it, in some ways I'm like, oh, I see my old self. That's what's happening. Like I feel that internally fairly often, to be honest, especially when it comes to like patriarchal ideals.
Yeah, it's like I'll notice something about myself that will come up just kind of quietly internally, and then realize like, shit, that's something that I used to think. That's something that I used to believe. And the reason that I got like emotional a second ago is because just like something that just like flashed to my mind was, I was closing at work the other day, and a group of girls walked by, and they were all wearing, oh my gosh, I really don't want to butcher this term. They were in full like head to toe with their faces showing Muslim garb. And one of them said, "Is that Lily?" And she comes over and she's like, "Oh my gosh!" And we like give each other like a huge hug, because she and I work at one of my seasonal jobs that I took when I was in the interim of like looking, trying to get this current job back. And I just remember being younger, being in my cult-informed mindset, and being around people that would speak so unkindly to people that were religiously dressed in that way. And this isn't at all to say, oh my gosh, like look at me and my friend now and how far I've come. It's honestly the opposite of, it was just this flash of like, this is a representation of dreadful misinformation that I used to hold within myself. And I almost feel like, not a fraud, because that's not how I identify anymore, but I almost feel like maybe this person wouldn't trust me or come up and give me a hug in front of her other friends. Me with like my obviously like my hair out up in a clip and like wearing a bunch of jewelry and just whatever. Like we're obviously like friends from different cultures, and maybe this person wouldn't trust me if they knew that I used to think that their culture and that their religion was some infringement on my life and of my beliefs.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's it is in a sense a good illustration of kind of what you miss out on when you're in the cult of Christianity, the
best education that I was able to get after moving out and then eventually after leaving Christianity was just getting to know people that were different from me and just getting context in everything.
Yeah. And just realizing that it's a lie, that everyone out there is out to get you. I mean, it's just, not only is it not true, it's almost laughable. And
Yeah, literally.
the projection is laughable,
Literally.
And like I've had similar feelings, being like at a drag show, or like, like hanging with like, even like my best friend Amelia, just how if I had stayed down the route of conservative pastor, like our friendship, I don't think it would have held, and like, that's haunting to think about. I mean,
Literally.
it really is.
Yeah.
And it shows how kind of moldable the mind is too. Like how it's like, wow, I was that. I mean, you can't, obviously you and I were raised in it, but there's people who join later, and like, it shows you that like, you can be coerced to believe some pretty intense, dare I say, evil things. And it is very relieving to be out. But yeah, I do know what you mean, where there's kind of like, it's not necessarily like, I feel more guilty and shameful about like some of the like, just bad behavior I had as a Christian, but some of the beliefs I had, I think like I've come a long way in saying like, look, so much of that was just straight up indoctrination. Like you were literally coerced to be in a very specific kind of mental state to believe very hard to believe things. And I do feel better about that than I used to. But I mean, I'll kind of, start wrapping up with this, even though I'd rather talk to you for probably 4 more hours.
We can
are
just
there
get
any
off
like
on the phone.
That's true. We do have that. We have the technology. But then how will I monetize your tears, Lily? Which
You're
is
already,
what this is all about.
You're already not. You're already... I already know you make very little from this podcast.
I make millions of dollars on this podcast. Are there I don't know, like, what are there recurring triggers that have been harder to like related to religious trauma? Have there been recurring triggers that come up maybe more frequently than others?
The things that I can think of when you ask that, I feel like it sounds a little bit silly, but I get a little bit triggered with my trust if I interact with someone wearing a cross.
Oh, well, that's just good reasoning in my worldview, but maybe it is a trigger.
I get it. The reason I feel silly in saying it is because I know that for like so frequently for so many people, it's not that deep. But for me, it's an indication of something that is super deep. One of my closest, like coworker friends, I'm in like a group chat with her, and she's like raunchy and fun. She wears a cross necklace every day, and I know that she does identify as a Christian, and I'm perfectly accepting, like fine with that. She and I've never talked about religious trauma. I've never personally witnessed the like deep, bothersome things that I identify with or identified with as a Christian. And I think that kind of goes into a conversation of just me realizing that Christianity can mean a lot of different things to different people. And so I try to stay very open and kind about that and try to learn what that means for that person. And oftentimes, it's a personal thing. And I think that that's what this is for this friend that I have. But I do get triggered of like, just initially, I'm not sure what you value. When I see that, I'm not sure if you value my life more than you value maybe certain beliefs. And I don't know that I can ask that of you.
It's interesting that you frame that as like I mean, you're right that it is a sign of religious trauma. I think you're right. It's just so interesting because to me, I'm like, well, yeah, that's being smart. That's making sure you don't get burned again. Like to me, like I don't even, and like I know that like our approaches are slightly, I think you have the better approach transparently to be more open minded. I think that's always the way to kill cults is actually to be open minded and not retaliatory or anything like that. But I'm like, no, if you're choosing to wear, a cross is a torture device, like, and like the sort of cognitive dissonance that happens between like the good-hearted Christians that do exist and the religion that teaches a lot of violent things. I think it's warranted to be concerned about, I guess, is kind of the framing I'm sitting with right now. But it is hard because, I still have Christian friends who I love dearly and just Christian acquaintances I hang out with regularly who they know what I do for a living. And they might try to sneak in a little jab here or there, and I might sneak in a jab here or there. But it's all in good fun, and I think we can still get along just fine. But yeah, there will always be a barrier between me and Christians. And I kind of want Christians to know that, to be frank.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I don't, I can, I don't know. I don't identify that way, but I also understand why someone would. Yeah. For me, it's just kind of a signal to be cautiously curious. And I don't get close with, every person. I'm not just like some, big open butterfly, although I might like to present that way sometimes. But the people that I do talk to, that I do spend time with, I do, regardless of if they're Christian or not, get as close to them as possible. Frankly, I think a lot of that has to do with my own particular neurodivergence and how it presents itself. And I was also, homeschooled until college and in the middle of nowhere. And I think that there's a lot of different things that just goes into that difference between you and I. And I don't think that mine is necessarily better.
It's always better. Transparently, no, your approach is always better.
That's very kind of you to say. No, I love you. And
I love you too.
I think that any way that you keep yourself safe is important.
Yeah. Well, and I want to be very clear, like there's a big difference between what someone believes kind of privately versus like lives by publicly, like, and that's true for everyone, but I think some people do need Christianity to some extent to have a template to make their life make sense. I do hope it's one of the less harmful iterations of it, one of them, and a more progressive theological stance. But I just get concerned probably about like I don't know. It's probably just the current country I'm in, right? Where it's just like there's so much damage done, and I just don't want us as a society to be in denial about how this can be the source of significant trauma. I mean, that's really what religious trauma is, a new term, right? Like it's only about 20 years old. And so we're just at the beginning of talking about these things. And so I feel like to me, like, I think where I get triggered is like, is where I feel gaslighted, is where it's like, where I feel like people are saying, you just had a few bad church experiences and it's not that deep. It's not that big a deal. You can believe whatever you want. They let you leave. And, those kind of ideas.
It's the fact that they let you leave. Why is it framed that way?
Yeah, right. Like I should be grateful, right? Like, I should be grateful I wasn't violently restrained to stay to an ideology. Like that's the kind of pass they get. Yeah. So that's where it comes up for me. But I do. But even that is frustrating. I have family who still believes what I think are very terrible things. I still have people I love deeply who I think I'm going to burn in hell forever. that's stuff that doesn't go away. That's stuff I can't process through. That's just the reality. Is some people are just going to keep believing those things, and that's kind of out of my control, you know?
Yeah, that's really hard. Like I, frankly, I hate that. Like, like as accepting and as like kind as I do strive to be, with other people's, religious beliefs and what they need, to live their own lives, it does frustrate me, whenever I get down to thinking like, this person might actually think that I'm going to burn in hell. But then that also, I don't know, it also goes back to the like, so many people, it's not that deep with their Christianity. And then it's weird, like how many different variations there seems to be with Christianity. And I kind of think that that is what lends itself into being more of a cult, because it's like, why do you want to appeal to so many people? But then
right.
how?
Well, and there's also sorry to cut you off. It's also the means of like the like it's not just like how it's like, how can you uphold the system that teaches it? Like, to me, I'm like, it's similar to some political debates. It's like, okay, it's not that serious for you, but you understand there are people who think like trans people shouldn't exist who share your God, like, does that not make you want to be a little more active and a little less passive? And even that causes some distrust for me. I don't know if it's that intense for you, but I do agree. It's not even so many different iterations. When you get into denominations, each individual like has a different set of beliefs. Like no two people, I don't think any two people have the exact same verbatim religious belief.
Yeah, I don't think that either. Yeah, I don't know. I never know exactly when to, and both are true ones, but I never know exactly when to get into the like, yeah, every individual has their own iteration of their own spiritual belief or practice. Also, like if that spiritual belief or practice is associated very heavily with these other things that are scary, like I don't know, like what work are you doing to separate yourself from that, I guess?
Yeah, why do you need why do you need the label? Why do you need the identity with all the rest? Yeah, like that would be a question I guess I'd have if someone wanted to have a conversation. But frankly, I don't know that people maybe I'll close with this. Like, do you think people want to, who are still maybe in these kind of cultic groups, we'll call it high control religion to be nice and general. Do you think those people give a shit about our religious trauma? Because my gut tells me they don't.
I don't even know if I know how to answer that. And I hate always being this way with your questions, but like
say what's on your mind, not necessarily what I asked.
it's just like I don't I think that there are so many different ways that folks that are within these high control religious groups, I think there's so many different ways that they find of I guess trying to find another solution or another name for what happened, or for another, like, well, this, like, they get so nuanced into like individual experiences, which it is very individual, but it's also trauma that is caused by religion. And I think that it is so difficult for that to be held as being true, while also it being true that that person can stay within that religion. I think it's very difficult for a person that is practicing that religion to stay within that religion and be sincere while also sincerely holding the realities of the trauma that comes from some of those beliefs. I think it's hard to hold both of those things as true for anyone, but for anyone that is trying to stay within that religion, it's especially hard to hold those things as being simultaneously true. And instead, it's a lot cognitively easier to just kind of find other reasons for why those traumas happened and for other solutions for that trauma that are not entirely disregarding Christianity.
Yeah, well put. And I would even say, to sharpen the kind of idea that I was thinking of, that in response to what you just made me think of, is like, you know, when I was a Christian, like, people would tell me how they were hurt by the church. And my response was to do kind of what you're talking about, like, well, what exactly happened? You know, like, let me try to grid this on my theological framework, you know, and see if I can do some math to make this math, you know. And I think, to be honest, my sincere care for those people is one part of what led me out of the religion. You know, I think you can care about people when you're in these high control groups, but you won't stay long if you do.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, and just like, I mean, obviously, this is what I believe. This is what I tout, is that, like, so many good people are in these high control groups, but I've been so broken, like, and so, like, manipulated into believing that their brother is their enemy. And just that, like, that somehow caring for people and listening and coming from a place of genuine humility instead of fake humility, but, like, actually hearing what survivors of these groups are saying and, like, taking it to heart and maybe just trusting the victim a little bit more instead of just, like, seeing how it might have been their faults would do wonders. But I acknowledge that, like, the reason I don't think that happens as much is not necessarily the followers' fault. I put that blame squarely on the cult leaders, who are literally propagating ideas that frankly are causing less love and less grace and less mercy. And that's where my sort of confrontational and angst comes from, you know, is just like, there's so many good people in the cult and they can't hear because they've been trained to plug their ears, or at least that's kind of my perception of the narrative.
Yeah, no, that really rings true for me. I think that is done. I think what we're talking about is done in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different circumstances. Just organizations like Christianity happen to carry the bigger weight of instructing a person in how to think of their entire life and how to live their entire life and their eternal life. An analogy that I was just kind of, like, thinking about in my head, as far as, like, holding the truth of multiple things at once and also struggling to acknowledge the harm in one of those things while doing so. It just reminded me of just, like, a little tiff that I got into on Instagram recently with a sex educator.
Ooh, spill the tea. No, I'm just kidding. Just say it generally.
Yeah, I don't even remember their handle. It doesn't even matter. But I get really frustrated when a person's experience or opinion or take on something is presented as fact for all. I think this particular post was talking about condoms and textured condoms and how the, like, ribbed for her pleasure thing was complete crap, 100% for everyone. And I'm just like, I don't know, like, when I was 19, like, I really liked those. So, like, just maybe not say 100% for everything. You know?
Also, like, my hot take is, with all that's going in the world, like, that's going to be your take.
No,
but okay.
No, I know.
What,
yeah,
you know, like, it's just,
exactly.
yeah.
and it's like, and it doesn't even like matter how like nuanced it is. It just in general just really irritates me when someone who is putting themselves in the position of being an educator is presenting a circle of personal opinion as 100% fact for everyone. Like I get equally frustrated when sex educators claim that like next to no women experience orgasms from penetration. It's not true.
Yeah, that's wild. What a wild take.
Yes, absolutely. I am so here for education on, like all
just like there's
anatomy.
Educating how people feel pleasure is like what does that even mean? Like,
well, and it's like why
individuals like what?
I just don't get why we're excluding things. It's just like stop saying that it's all of one thing. It's just as varied as individuals are. Surprise.
Well, and this is why I'm anti-cult, right? Is that in my estimation, that's what cults do, is they try to erase the individuality of people. Like that's
exactly.
the whole shebang. So like, yeah, I would say like, to me, like, I think people sometimes mishear that I'm trying to like, it's like two teams, like it's like team Christianity and team anti-Christian, and I'm on the anti-Christian side. It's like, well, first off, I'm anti a very specific thing that's happening in Christianity. And like some of it is a result of Christian beliefs, don't get me wrong. But it's like, and I am anti-Christian in the practical sense, like in the, like in the sense that I'm like, yeah, like a lack of trust, and also there should be some accountability rather than none, for Christianity. But like to me, the whole point is being anti-cult, which cults like necessarily say you're a follower, I'm a leader, you do what I say. And I'm against that. And I think, I do see change on the horizon, and I hope things change. But when it comes to mental health in general, I just think the worst thing for your mental health is to be told your mind doesn't matter, and that your mind only matters if you believe these things, is just so bad for your mental health, no matter what the ideology is.
Yeah, I really can't respond strongly enough to that. I mean, if you teach someone that they should inherently distrust their mind and what their mind and their body tells them, I don't care what follows. Like, I don't care what purpose that's for. I don't care who you are, what your intention is. That is inherently insidious, and you should just stop. Like, just full stop, period.
Stop it, people. Just stop it. Stop it. Lilly, the end. Here we are. You'll be back for the series for the podcast finale. So that'll be fun. But in the meantime, what's your Cash App, Venmo, Instagram handle? Like, what do you want people to do?
Oh my gosh, not you saying Cash App. So my Cash App is $Lilly Hannah's.
Awesome. I'm gonna send you a little present, right? I'm gonna send you your royalties now. How about that?
My Venmo is also, I think, like Lily Pad.
Great. That's awesome.
that's so funny. No, it's Lily Pad Hannah. I'm gonna die. No, for reals though, my Instagram is as always Sweet Words Witch. I've gotten a little bit more cautious of accepting follow requests since my ex's whatever. It's all a thing. Please follow me if you're not crazy, and yeah, please take care of yourself, and please just remember that it's not that deep, and also it's very deep.
Nice tagline too. I've just paid you for your emotional labor, so. And really? I said it live on the podcast. Yeah, I did. so there's evidence. There was no bias beforehand. I waited to pay till after. She did not know she was going to be paid. My journalistic integrity is intact, and I just felt like sending her $20. So
I'm dead. Thank you.
Lily, I love you. Thank you so much for coming on.
I love you so much. Thank you for scheduling me on not once but twice, and I can't wait to come back for the finale and talk to you more after this.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, listener, for stopping by. I will talk to y'all soon. This is the final season of the Cult of Christianity, but this is not the last time I will be investigating religions and cults. If you'd like to continue to follow my work, go to jverner.com or follow my Substack at johnverner.substack.com. You can also continue to support my work by going to thecultofchristianity.com and subscribing for a giant backlog of bonus content and stay up to date when my next big project releases. Thank you for listening, subscribing, sharing, reviewing, and as always, keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.